They say miracles happen every day, but when my ex-girlfriend sent me a floral letter claiming she was pregnant with my child, I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a lie. Because a decade before I met her, a doctor told me I would never be a father. My cancer didn't just take my health, it took my fertility. Or so I thought, until the lawyers got involved. My name is David. I'm 33 now, living in a quiet pocket of the Pacific Northwest, working a career that requires logic, data, and hard facts. Maybe I sought out a world of provable truths because my childhood felt like a chaotic gamble. When I was 11, while other kids were obsessing over POK Monday cards and Little League, I was being introduced to the oncology ward at SD. Jude's leukemia is a relentless thief. It stole my hair, my energy, and 2 years of what should have been a carefree childhood. I remember my parents' faces in those fluorescent lit hallways, the kind of look that says they'd trade places with you in a heartbeat if the universe allowed it. I survived, obviously. I am one of the lucky ones. But the victory came with a high price tag. The aggressive chemotherapy and radiation that saved my life also acted like a scorched earth policy on my reproductive system. By the time I was 18, a specialist at a fertility clinic in Seattle sat me down and gave it to me straight. He used the word azoospermia. It sounded like a planet in a sci-fi movie, but the reality was much more grounded. My body doesn't produce sperm. Zero. None. In your 20s. You process that news with a weird mix of detachment and secret relief. No accidents to worry about, right? But as you hit your 30s, it settles into a quiet, permanent background noise. I made my peace with it. I focused on my health, my doc, and my career. I accepted that if I ever became a father, it would be through adoption or a miracle of science that didn't involve my DNA. I've always been upfront about it with the women I date, at least. The ones who stick around long enough for it to matter. Or so I thought. I didn't realize that for some people, a medical history isn't a tragedy to be respected. It's a loophole to be exploited. By the time I met Sarah, I was 31, and frankly, tired of the dating app treadmill. She was a marketing executive, sharp, charismatic, and possessed a laugh that could fill a room. For the first 6 months, it felt like I'd finally found someone who operated on my wavelength. But looking back, the red flags weren't bright red. They were more like a slow, creeping grey. Sarah had a way of making everything a competition where she was the only one allowed to win. If I had a stressful day at the office, her day was catastrophic. If I wanted to spend a Saturday visiting my parents, it was framed as me neglecting her needs. She mastered the art of the me-first narrative, wrapped in the language of self-care. It was subtle the way she'd pout if I didn't choose the restaurant she wanted, or how she'd forget her wallet every time we went out for an expensive dinner. But the real cracks appeared when we talked about the future. I was honest with her from the 3rd month. I told her about the leukemia, the treatments, and the fact that biological children weren't on the table for me. She'd nodded sympathetically, touched my hand, and said, "David, your heart is what matters to me, not your DNA." It was a beautiful light. As the months rolled by, her mask began to slip. She started making jokes in front of our friends about how she'd have to find a very tall donor one day if we wanted a kid who could play basketball. Then came the mood swings. She grew resentful of my stability. My life was built on routines, health checks, financial planning, gym sessions, things I did to stay alive and well. To her, my discipline was boring. She craved drama. She craved a life that looked like a high-end Instagram feed, and I was just the reliable supporting actor. The end wasn't a cinematic explosion. It was a cold Tuesday night in our apartment in the Pearl District. I caught her in a series of small, stupid lies about where she'd been after work. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen before and said, "Maybe I'm just bored of being with someone who's so limited." That was it. I told her to pack her things. I thought I was closing a chapter on a relationship that had turned toxic. I thought I was finally free of the gaslighting. I had no idea she was already drafting a script for a sequel I never auditioned for. For months. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen Sarah's face or heard her voice. I was finally sleeping through the night again. My apartment felt like mine again. No more passive-aggressive sighs. No more walking on eggshells. Then, I checked the mail on a random Thursday. Tucked between a utility bill and a credit card offer was a heavy, cream-colored envelope. It was addressed to me in that familiar, loopy cursive she used for birthday cards. There was no return address, just a scent of peonies that hit me the second I pulled it out. It was a physical letter, an intentional choice in an age of instant, erasable digital footprints. I sat down at my kitchen table, my heart doing a strange, uneven rhythm. I tore it open, expecting a late apology or a demand for a forgotten sweater. Instead, I pulled out a card with a floral border. Inside, just 3 sentences that felt like a physical strike to the solar plexus. David, I didn't want it to be this way, but I am pregnant. It's been 12 weeks. You're the father, and we need to discuss how we're going to see you parent this child. Call me. For a split second, the world went silent. It's a biological instinct. I guess that sudden rush of what if. But then, the logic kicked in. The cold, hard, medical reality I'd lived with since I was a teenager came rushing back like a shield. The psychological whiplash was staggering. I wasn't just looking at a lie. I was looking at a calculated attempt to rewrite the laws of my own body. There is a specific kind of vertigo you feel when someone tries to gaslight you about your own medical history. I knew with 100% clinical certainty that it was impossible. My oncology records weren't just notes. They were a death sentence for any chance of natural conception. I stared at that floral stationery and felt a chill go down my spine. This wasn't a mistake. She knew about my past. She'd sat in my living room while I explained why I could never have mini Davids running around. By sending this, she wasn't just lying to me. She was betting that I was either too stupid to remember my own diagnosis or too weak to fight a pregnant woman in the court of public opinion. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I just laid the letter flat on the table, took a photo of it for my records, and realized that the boredom she complained about during our breakup had morphed into something far more dangerous. A desperate need for a provider to cover for someone else's mistake. I waited 3 days before responding. I wanted the adrenaline to subside so I could speak with the clinical detachment of a man reading a weather report. I sent a brief, 1-sentence email. I'll need a prenatal paternity test before we discuss any further steps. The response wasn't an email. It was a nuclear meltdown. Within an hour, my phone began to vibrate off the nightstand. It wasn't just Sarah. It was the flying monkeys, the term psychologists use for the third parties and manipulator recruits to do their dirty work. First, it was her mother, Linda, leaving a voicemail that sounded like a script from a daytime soap opera. David, I thought you were a man of honor. To demand a test while my daughter is in such a fragile state. It's ghoulish. You know what you two are doing. Step up. Then came the texts from our mutual friends. Bro, a DNA test. Really? She's devastated. Just take care of your kid, man. It was a coordinated strike. Sarah had painted a picture of a terrified, pregnant woman being bullied by a cold-hearted deadbeat who was trying to use a medical excuse to dodge his responsibilities. The gaslighting was masterful. She started posting 8 grams black and white photos of solograms with captions about doing it alone and finding out someone's true colors. When things get hard, she was weaponizing the American cultural instinct to protect the mother at all costs stored in her mind. She had successfully reframed my leukemia as a childhood story that didn't apply to the present. She tried to make me doubt my own reality. She even called me, sobbing, saying, David, maybe the doctors were wrong. Miracles happen. Don't you want to believe in miracles? It's a bizarre feeling when a whole community looks at you like a monster for asking for the truth. For a second, you almost want to apologize just to make the noise stop. But then I looked at my medical folder, the thick blue binder from the University of Washington Medical Center. My miracle happened 22 years ago when I didn't die. This was just a math problem she was trying to force an incorrect answer into. I stopped answering the phone. I realized that in the court of public opinion, I was already guilty. If I wanted to survive this, I had to stop playing the ex-boyfriend and start playing the defendant. The transition from emotional manipulation to legal warfare happened on a Tuesday. I walked into my office to find a thick manila envelope sitting on my desk. No floral scents this time. The return address was for a high-rise law firm in downtown Seattle, the kind of place with mahogany desks and a billable hour that costs more than my monthly car payment. Sarah had stopped crying on my voicemail and started talking through a senior associate. The letter was a formal notice of intent to claim child support. It was cold, aggressive, and framed with terrifying precision. It didn't just ask for cooperation. It demanded a full disclosure of my financial assets, my 401k balance, and my recent tax returns. It painted me as a putative father who was willfully obstructing the well-being of an unborn child. In the United States, the legal system is often a game of who can scream the loudest with the most paperwork by hiring a firm. Sarah was betting that the sheer intimidation of a legal suit would force me to settle. She wanted a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. If I signed that, my medical history wouldn't matter anymore. I would be legally bound to pay for a child that wasn't mine for the next 18 years. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about my reputation in our friend group anymore. This was about my financial future and my legal standing. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, calculating the cost of a defense. I realized that Sarah was likely using the married coworker she'd been seeing to fund this legal push. Or perhaps she was just so desperate she was putting it all on a credit card, gambling that she'd win a lifetime of support payments from me. I called my own attorney the next morning. When he asked, "David, is there any chance you're the father?" I didn't just say no, I told him. I have 15 years of labs that say it's a biological impossibility. He paused, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. In that case, David, they haven't brought a knife to a gunfight. They've brought a lie to a lab test. Let's give them exactly what they asked for. There is a strange, quiet power in having a paper trail. Most people find their medical history to be a burden, but for me, the thick blue binder from the University of Washington Medical Center became my greatest ally. I spent the weekend in my home office, the floor covered in chronological records. I pulled every lab report from age 18 to 33, every 6 months like clockwork. I had undergone testing to monitor my long-term recovery from leukemia, and every single time, tucked at the bottom of the blood work and the endocrine panels, was the same result. Sperm count, 0 million or milliliters. Status, permanent azoospermia due to gonadotoxic chemotherapy. I wasn't just sending a no to her lawyers. I was sending a mountain of clinical data. I met with my attorney, a sharp guy named Marcos who specialized in family law. He looked through the stack of papers, whistling low. "David," he said, "this isn't just a defense. This is a total shutdown. They're claiming miracle conception in their narrative. But these documents prove that unless you're the subject of a peer-reviewed medical anomaly, Sarah is committing fraud. We didn't call Sarah. We didn't send an emotional email to her mother. We played it strictly by the book." Marcus drafted a formal response to the downtown firm. We attached 3 specific lab reports, one from before I met Sarah, one from during our relationship, and one from 3 weeks after the breakup. The cover letter was a masterpiece of legal politeness. It essentially said, "Our client has been medically sterile since childhood. Please find the attached 15 years of oncology and fertility records. Should you choose to proceed with a paternity claim, we will be seeking a court-ordered DNA test," followed immediately by a countersuit for legal fees, defamation, and malicious prosecution. I felt a massive weight lift as I watched Marcus hit send on that digital filing. For months, I had been the villain in Sarah's Instagram stories and her mother's phone calls. I had been the monster who wouldn't support his child. But the beauty of science is that it doesn't care about your feelings, your loopy cursive, or your floral stationery. I walked out of that office into the crisp, settled air, knowing that the ball wasn't just in their court. The ball had been replaced with a ticking time bomb of their own making. The silence from the downtown law firm was deafening. No more summons, no more demands for my 401k. But while the legal front went quiet, the personal front exploded. It happened on a Saturday morning. I heard a frantic knocking at my door. It wasn't Sarah. It was her younger sister, Amy. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't come to yell. She came because she had seen the medical records Marcus had CC'd to Sarah's personal email as part of the legal discovery process. Sarah had left her laptop open, and Amy had read it all. "David," she whispered, stepping into my foyer. "Is it true? About the cancer? About everything?" I didn't say a word. I just handed her the blue binder. She sat on my sofa and flipped through the pages, the biopsies, the chemo schedules, the flatline fertility results. As she read, I watched the color drain from her face. She realized that the "David is a deadbeat" narrative she had been defending at family dinners was a total fabrication. Then the dam broke. Amy started talking, and the real story spilled out, the one Sarah hadn't shared on Instagram. Sarah wasn't just lying to me. She was trapped in a web of her own making. The miracle baby was actually the result of a messy, months-long affair with her department head at the marketing firm, a man named Mark, who was very much married with 3 kids of his own. Sarah had panicked. Mark wouldn't leave his wife, and he certainly wasn't going to support a secret child. She needed a legitimate father with a stable income and a clean reputation to take the hit. I was the perfect candidate, the ex-boyfriend with a convenient medical story she thought she could dismiss as a fluke. She had told her parents I was denying my own blood. She had even told her HR department that she might need special considerations because the father me was being uncooperative and abusive. She told us you were trying to punish her for the breakup, Amy said, her voice trembling. My dad was ready to come to your office and confront you. We all believed her. Watching the house of cards collapse was sobering. It wasn't a moment of victory like in the movies. It was just sad. Sarah had gambled her relationships with her family, her career, and her integrity on the hope that I wouldn't have the courage to stand by my own truth. She didn't just lose the child support. She lost the trust of everyone who actually cared about her. When a cornered animal realizes it can't escape, it lashes out. When a manipulator realizes their lie has been dismantled by science, they change the subject. Within a week of Amy's visit, I received a new communication. Sarah had dropped her high-end family law firm, likely because they advised her to run for the hills and hired a solo practitioner known for aggressive litigation. This wasn't about paternity anymore. This was a pivot to the defamation defense. The new claim was surreal. She wasn't arguing about the baby's DNA anymore. She was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and violation of medical privacy. Her argument? That by sharing my own medical records with her family and legal counsel, I had humiliated her and caused her irreparable psychological harm. She was trying to use the American legal system's protection of privacy as a weapon to hide her fraud. Her lawyer sent a cease and desist, demanding I stop disseminating false narratives about her pregnancy to mutual friends. It was a classic slap-suit strategic lawsuit against public participation tactic, an attempt to bury me in legal fees until I agreed to stay silent and, presumably, pay her to go away. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She had spent months publicly branding me a deadbeat and a monster on social media, true defamation, but the moment I provided a clinical defense, I was the aggressor. My lawyer, Marcus, just laughed when he read the new filing. David, this is the Hail Mary of a losing team, he told me. In the US, truth is an absolute defense against defamation. And as for privacy, you shared your own records to defend yourself against a financial claim she initiated. She opened the door. You just walked through it with a flashlight. But even knowing I was right, the stress was a heavy weight. I had to sit through a deposition where her lawyer tried to twist my childhood trauma into a weapon, asking if I was resentful of fertile women or if I was seeking revenge for my illness. I stayed calm. I looked them in the eye and kept repeating the same 3 words. Read the labs. She wanted me to blink. She wanted me to pay for her silence so she could keep her job and her reputation intact. But she forgot one thing. After surviving stage 4 leukemia at 11, a frivolous lawsuit doesn't feel like a threat, it feels like an inconvenience. The end didn't come with a gavel or a dramatic courtroom confession. In the American legal system, most was of attrition end with a whimper, a strategic retreat disguised as a misunderstanding. 10 days before we were set to go before a judge, a final letter arrived from Sarah's second lawyer. The tone had shifted from aggressive to embarrassingly formal. They were dropping all claims, the child support, the emotional distress, the privacy violations. The reason? They called it a clerical error. The letter claimed that Sarah had misinterpreted her medical results and that, upon further review with her OB/GYN, the dates did not align with our relationship. It was a pathetic attempt to save face, a legal way of saying, we got caught, and we're running before the judge hits us with sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. But while the legal battle ended, the implosion was just beginning. In a city like Seattle, the professional circles are smaller than you think. The married coworker, Mark, had his own reckoning. Once the legal discovery process became part of the public record, his wife found out. The marketing firm, fearing a sexual harassment or conduct unbecoming lawsuit, launched an internal investigation. Mark was asked to resign, and Sarah's contract wasn't renewed. The social fallout was even more clinical. The flying monkeys who had spent months trashing my name suddenly went dark. Some sent "I'm so sorry, I didn't know" texts, which I ignored. Sarah's mother didn't call. I heard through Amy that Sarah had moved back to her hometown in the Midwest, unable to show her face in the offices or coffee shops where she'd spent months playing the victim. I signed the final settlement papers in Marcus's office. There was no payout for me. I'd spent thousands on my own defense, but I did secure a non-disparagement agreement and a permanent withdrawal of paternity claim with prejudice. It meant she could never, ever come after me again. As I walked out into the rain, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had won, but there was no trophy for proving your ex-girlfriend is a fraud. There was just the quiet realization that the truth is a heavy thing to carry, but it's the only thing that keeps you from being crushed by someone else's lies. I'm 33 now, and my life has finally returned to a state of quiet, intentional peace. The Floral stationery is gone. The legal files are archived in a digital cloud I hope to never open again. And the miracle pregnancy has moved on to be someone else's reality. Looking back on this year, I've realized that being a survivor isn't a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. When I was 11, surviving meant making it through the next round of chemo. At 33, surviving meant having the backbone to stand by the truth when an entire community was shouting me down. I've learned that in the American dating scene, we often prioritize chemistry and vibes over the hard, awkward conversations. We avoid talking about health, fertility, and boundaries because we don't want to ruin the mood. But I've learned that the mood isn't worth a damn if it isn't built on a foundation of radical honesty. I no longer apologize for my medical history. It's not a limitation. As Sarah called it, it's a filter. It filters out the people who are looking for a character to play a role in their life, rather than a partner to share a journey with. There is a strange, profound gratitude I feel for the scars on my chest and the reality of my diagnosis. Those scars, which I once viewed as a tragic byproduct of a stolen childhood, ended up being the very things that saved my adulthood. They were the receipts that Sarah couldn't burn. They forced me to develop a sense of self-worth that isn't tied to biological legacy, but to character and resilience. Trust is harder to give now. I won't lie. I'm more observant, more cautious with who I let into my inner circle. But the trust I do have is deeper. I know who my real friends are, the ones who didn't send flying monkey texts. I know I can rely on my own logic and the hard data of my life. I am moving forward. I am open to the idea of a family one day through adoption or fostering, but it will be on my terms, built on a foundation of truth. My name is David. I am 33. And I've learned that sometimes the hardest things we go through are simply the armor we'll need for the battles we haven't fought yet. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.